2 brothers. Same parents. Same house. Same public school in the same mid-sized city. Daniel is the older one. He was always the smart one, the driven one, the one the family pointed to with quiet pride. He got a good job at 23, earned decent money through his 20s, spent freely because he felt he'd earned it, and told himself he'd get serious about money when he turned 30. 30 felt far away, and then it didn't. He turned 30 with $4,200 in savings, $19,000 in credit card and personal loan debt, a vague anxiety he couldn't fully explain, and the dawning, uncomfortable awareness that he had spent the most financially powerful decade of his life without understanding it was powerful at all. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't irresponsible in any dramatic way. He just didn't know. Nobody told him. And the people around him were doing the same things, so nothing felt wrong until the decade was over and the math became impossible to ignore. His younger brother, Caleb, is 28. He makes less than Daniel did at the same age. He drives an older car. He's never taken an expensive vacation. His apartment is modest and he's genuinely fine with it. But he started investing at 22 with $150 a month. He automated everything. He avoided debt with the same energy most people avoid discomfort. And by 28, he has $47,000 in invested assets, no consumer debt, and a financial structure that already works without him having to think about it every day. Caleb didn't do anything extraordinary. He did ordinary things at the right time. Daniel did ordinary things too. He just did them in the wrong order. Same parents. Same starting point. The only difference between them is a handful of decisions made, or not made, before the age of 30. Pause. Music fades in softly. This isn't about getting rich young. It's about understanding that your 20s are not a financial warm-up act. They are the most leveraged decade of your financial life, and most people spend them completely unaware of that fact until it's behind them. The feeling Daniel had at 30, that specific, quiet dread of realizing you're behind in a race you didn't know you were running, is one of the most common financial experiences in modern life. And it is almost entirely preventable. I'm going to show you the exact rules that determine whether your 20s build a foundation you'll stand on for the rest of your life or a gap you'll spend the next 2 decades trying to close. These are not motivational principles. They are specific, concrete, financially consequential truths about how time and money interact, truths that are rarely explained clearly to people who are young enough to act on them. If you're under 30, this is the most important financial video you will watch. If you're past 30, this is the video you'll wish someone had shown you earlier. Either way, what you do with it from today forward still matters enormously. Transition to core content. Rule 1, your 20s are not the decade to find yourself financially. They are the decade where the financial version of you gets built, whether you participate in that construction or not. This is the frame that changes everything. Most people in their 20s operate with an implicit belief that their financial life hasn't really started yet. They're figuring things out. They're building their career. They're experiencing things. The real financial decisions come later, when they have more income, more stability, more clarity about what they want. The money stuff can wait. But here's the thing that nobody says clearly enough. Your financial life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It's running right now. Every month that passes without investing is a month of compounding that doesn't happen. Every dollar of consumer debt you carry is a dollar paying interest instead of growing. Every lifestyle habit you establish in your 20s becomes the baseline you'll defend and maintain in your 30s and 40s. The decade is not neutral. It is actively building or actively eroding your future financial position, and it's doing that regardless of whether you're paying attention. The real-world consequence is this. The average person who starts investing at 22 will have roughly twice the retirement assets of someone who starts at 32, assuming identical contribution amounts and identical returns. Not 20% more. Not 50% more. Twice. A full decade of compounding is worth more than another decade of contributions later. The math is that clear and that unforgiving. The psychological insight is that the feeling of having time is one of the most expensive feelings in personal finance. Time feels abundant at 24. It feels less abundant at 34. And by the time urgency arrives, the window where compounding works most powerfully has quietly closed. Rule 2, the first financial habit you build will compound just as surely as the first dollar you invest, and most people build the wrong one. Habits are financial assets or financial liabilities. They produce returns or they extract costs, month after month, decade after decade, without requiring any additional decisions from you. The first financial habit most people build in their 20s is spending their full income. It happens automatically. Money arrives, life absorbs it, and the pattern locks in. The second paycheck works the same way. And the third. And by the time a year has passed, the brain has wired a reliable sequence. Income arrives, spending follows, whatever remains is the leftover. In most cases, there is no leftover. The habit that changes everything is the reversal of that sequence. Income arrives, a fixed amount moves automatically to savings and investment before anything else happens, and then life is funded from what remains. This is not a budgeting technique. It is a complete rewiring of the financial habit loop. And if you build this habit in your 20s, if you make it automatic, non-negotiable, and consistent before your lifestyle has fully expanded, it will run quietly in the background of your financial life for the next 40 years, building wealth without requiring ongoing willpower. But here's what most people miss. The amount doesn't matter as much as the automation. Starting with $50 a month invested automatically is genuinely more valuable than planning to invest $500 a month when you feel financially ready. The $50 builds the habit. The habit scales. The readiness that most people are waiting for never arrives on its own. It is created by the structure you build, not by the feeling you're waiting to feel. Rule 3, debt in your 20s doesn't just cost you money. It costs you the rarest thing you will ever have. The rarest thing you have in your 20s is not money. It's time. And debt specifically converts your future time into payment for your past spending. It is the only financial instrument designed to do that. Here's what this looks like in actual numbers. You're 24. You carry $12,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest. You're making minimum payments of roughly $240 a month. At that rate, you'll pay off that balance in approximately 8 years, by the time you're 32, and you'll have paid roughly $11,000 in interest. You will have spent $23,000 to eliminate $12,000 in debt. But the real cost isn't the $11,000 in interest. It's what that $240 monthly payment would have been worth if invested instead. At 7% annual returns over 8 years, $240 a month becomes approximately $29,000. You didn't just lose $11,000 to interest. You lost $29,000 in future wealth plus the compounding that $29,000 would generate for the next 30 years. It gets worse. The lifestyle that generated the debt is usually still in place, which means new debt is being added while old debt is being paid. The treadmill moves, but the position doesn't change. The psychological insight is that debt in your 20s feels manageable because the payments feel small relative to your income. What doesn't feel small is impossible to see: the compounding you're not doing, the options you're not building, the flexibility you're quietly surrendering month by month. The payment is visible. The cost is invisible. And that invisibility is what makes debt in your 20s so specifically damaging. Rule 4, your income in your 20s matters far less than your savings rate, and conflating the two is the mistake that defines the decade for most people. This is the rule that separates Caleb from Daniel in our opening story, and it deserves to be stated without softening. Income is not wealth. Income is the raw material. Savings rate is the process that converts raw material into wealth. A high income with a low savings rate produces almost nothing. A modest income with a high savings rate produces something real. Daniel earned more than Caleb. He spent more than Caleb. His savings rate was somewhere around 3% in most years, the amount that drifted into his account when everything else had been spent. Caleb earned less and saved 22% automatically from the first month he had a paycheck. By 28, the gap between their financial positions is not explained by their incomes. It's explained entirely by the gap between what they earned and what they kept. The real-world version of this plays out in a way that most people don't expect. A person earning $55,000 and saving 20%, $11,000 per year, will build more genuine wealth over a decade than a person earning $90,000 and saving 5%, $4,500 per year. The lower income, higher savings rate person is building at more than twice the speed of the higher income, lower savings rate person. Income creates the opportunity. Savings rate determines whether you take it. Nobody talks about this directly because it's not an inspiring message. It tells you that the raise you're working toward will not solve the problem if the behavior doesn't change. And most people would rather believe that more income is the solution because more income is something external that can arrive without requiring them to change how they operate. Rule 5, the financial decisions you make in your 20s are not just financial decisions. They are structural decisions that will define the range of choices available to you for the next 2 decades. This is the one that most people only understand in retrospect, which is precisely why it needs to be said now. Every financial commitment you make, every recurring expense you add, every debt you take on, every lifestyle standard you establish, narrows the range of decisions available to you in the future. Not always dramatically, but consistently. And the narrowing compounds. Here's a concrete scenario. You're 26. You take on a car payment of $450 a month because you feel you've earned something nicer. You sign a lease on an apartment that stretches your budget because the neighborhood felt right. You carry moderate credit card balances because the social life of your mid-20s is expensive. By 28, your fixed monthly obligations consume 75% of your take-home pay before you've bought a single grocery item. Now a genuinely good opportunity arrives. A job in another city that would accelerate your career but requires a period of lower income during the transition. A business idea that would require 6 months of reduced salary. A relationship that would benefit from less financial stress and more flexibility. A health issue that requires time and attention you can't give because every dollar is spoken for. The structure you built at 26 is now making decisions for you at 28. You can't take the risk. You can't absorb the change. You can't say yes to the thing you actually want because the commitments you made when you were young and optimistic have quietly surrounded you. Financial flexibility is not a luxury. It is the structural condition that makes everything else possible. And it is built or destroyed in your 20s through a series of choices that don't feel structural at the time. Rule 6. Compound interest is the most important force in your financial life, and the most misunderstood one. Everyone has heard that compound interest is powerful. Almost nobody understands it viscerally enough to change their behavior. Let me try to fix that. Compound interest does not grow linearly. It grows exponentially. Which means the growth is slow at first, almost imperceptibly slow, and then it accelerates in ways that feel almost impossible when you see the numbers. Here's the specific illustration that changes how people understand this. Two people both invest $5,000 per year. Person A starts at 22 and stops at 30. They invest for 8 years, contributing a total of $40,000, and then never add another dollar. Person B starts at 30 and invests $5,000 per year every year until they're 65. They invest for 35 years and contribute a total of $175,000. At a 7% annual return, at age 65, Person A, who contributed $40,000 and stopped at 30, has approximately $602,000. Person B, who contributed $175,000 consistently for 35 years, has approximately $567,000. Person A has more money. They contributed less than a quarter as much. They simply started 8 years earlier. I want you to sit with that. 8 years of contributions, made between 22 and 30, outperformed 35 years of contributions made starting at 30. That is not a quirk. That is how compounding works. The early years are not the smallest and least significant years. They are the most important years, because they are the ones being multiplied the most times. The psychological insight is that this math is nearly impossible to feel at 22. You invest $150 and watch it become $153. The growth feels meaningless. The present cost of the investment feels real. The future value feels theoretical. This mismatch between what compounding feels like now and what it produces later is the central reason most people start too late. Rule 7. Your relationship with money is being formed in your 20s, and it will run on autopilot for the rest of your life unless you design it deliberately. Money psychology is not a soft topic. It is a practical one with quantifiable financial consequences. The beliefs you develop about money in your early adult life, whether money is scarce or abundant, whether wealth is for other people or available to you, whether spending is reward or risk, whether financial security is achievable or perpetually out of reach, these beliefs shape every financial decision you make for decades. They operate below the level of conscious strategy. They determine which information you pay attention to, which opportunities feel real to you, and which behaviors feel natural versus uncomfortable. Most people inherit their money beliefs from their family of origin without ever examining them. If you grew up in a household where money was a source of tension and scarcity, you may have internalized that financial stress is simply the texture of adult life, that it's normal, that it can't be significantly changed. If you grew up in a household where spending was how love was expressed, you may find that managing spending feels emotionally like withholding something important. Neither of these is a character flaw. Both of them are inherited frameworks that need to be examined and consciously updated if they're interfering with your financial outcomes. The practical application is this. Before your 30th birthday, write down your actual beliefs about money. Not the beliefs you think you should have. The ones that actually operate in your decisions. Do you believe you deserve financial security? Do you believe wealth requires luck or connections you don't have? Do you believe that people who save are somehow missing out on life? The beliefs that are causing you the most financial damage are almost always the ones that feel the most obviously true. Rule 8. The social environment you choose in your 20s sets a spending standard that is extraordinarily difficult to exit later. We've touched on social comparison before, but your 20s deserve a specific and direct conversation about this. Your peer group in your 20s is not just your social world. It is the primary reference point your brain uses to calibrate what is normal, acceptable, reasonable, and expected in terms of spending. If you spend your 20s in an environment where eating out is constant, travel is frequent, appearance requires ongoing investment, and frugality is quietly embarrassing, you will spend to that standard. Not because you're weak. Because that's how human social calibration works. The specific cost of a high-spending peer environment in your 20s is not just the money spent on social conformity. It's that it prevents you from building the habits and norms that would serve you for the next 40 years. The person who spends their entire 20s in a high-spending social environment arrives at 30 without the muscle of financial discipline, without the habit of saving first, and with a deeply ingrained sense of what their lifestyle should look like, a sense that now requires serious income just to maintain. But here's what most people miss. You don't have to replace your friends. You need to add 1 or 2 people to your life who think about money differently. Research on social influence consistently shows that even one dissenting voice in a social group changes the behavior of others significantly. Finding one friend who is intentional about building wealth, talking openly about money and goals, and treating financial discipline as normal rather than deprivation, that single relationship can shift your calibration more than any book or video. Rule 9. Your career decisions in your 20s are financial decisions, and most people make them without treating them that way. The biggest financial lever available to you in your 20s is not your savings rate or your investment returns. It is your earning trajectory. And your earning trajectory is largely determined by the career decisions you make before 30, which skills you develop, which industries you enter, which opportunities you pursue or decline. Most people make career decisions in their 20s based on immediate comfort, social expectations, or the path of least resistance. They take the first job that pays a reasonable salary without asking whether that job, in that industry, with that company, positions them for meaningful growth. They stay in roles past the point of learning because leaving feels risky. They underinvest in skills development because the return feels uncertain and the cost is immediate. The math on this is worth stating directly. The difference between a career that grows your income by 3% annually and one that grows it by 7% annually over 20 years is not small. Starting at $50,000, 3% annual growth produces a salary of approximately $90,000 at year 20. 7% annual growth produces a salary of approximately $193,000. The difference in lifetime earnings is measured in the hundreds of thousands. The difference in wealth building capacity is enormous. I'm not done yet. The 20s are the specific window when career risks cost the least. You have fewer obligations. You have more time to recover from a wrong turn. You have the energy and the absence of constraints that make bold career moves possible. The person who experiments in their 20s, who changes fields, who pursues the higher ceiling opportunity even at short-term cost, who invests in education or skills that aren't immediately monetized, typically ends up in a significantly stronger position by 35 than the person who optimized for immediate stability. Rule 10, not having a financial plan is itself a plan, and it is the most expensive plan available to you. This needs to be said bluntly. Not having a budget, not setting savings targets, not choosing investment accounts, not thinking about the future with any numerical specificity, these are not neutral stances. They are active choices with active consequences. The person who doesn't plan their finances doesn't thereby avoid financial outcomes. They simply allow their outcomes to be determined by default spending patterns, social pressures, and whatever habits formed without intention. And those default patterns, consistently across populations, produce worse financial outcomes than almost any deliberate plan, even a modest or imperfect one. A plan doesn't have to be complex. The simplest version that is meaningfully better than no plan looks like this. You know your monthly take-home income. You set a fixed savings rate, at minimum 15%, ideally 25%. That amount is automated before you see it. You have a target emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses in a separate, accessible account. You have a target investment account, at minimum, enough to capture any employer retirement match available to you. You have a rough sense of what you're building toward, not necessarily a specific retirement age, but at least a general direction. That's it. That's a plan. And it will dramatically outperform the absence of one. The psychological insight is that most people avoid making a financial plan because they're afraid of what the plan will reveal. Looking at the numbers means confronting the gap between where they are and where they should be. That confrontation is uncomfortable. So they maintain the comfortable ambiguity of not looking. But the gap they're avoiding is growing every month. The confrontation that happens at 30 or 40, when the gap is larger, is significantly more painful than the one that could happen now. Rule 11, the version of yourself you present to the world in your 20s will cost you money you don't have, and nobody talks about how much. Your 20s are the decade of identity performance. The clothes, the apartment, the car, the restaurants, the travel, so much of spending in your 20s is really spending on the image of the person you want to be perceived as. And this is not a moral failing. It is developmentally normal. Your 20s are when you figure out who you are, and one of the ways humans do that is through external presentation. The financial problem is that identity performance is one of the most expensive and least return-generating forms of spending available. The $300 spent on an outfit for a networking event does not generate $300 in career advancement. The $4,000 trip you took partly because your peer group would see it on social media did not generate $4,000 in life satisfaction. The upgraded apartment that costs $700 more per month than the reasonable one did not produce $700 per month in additional well-being. The hidden cost is not just the money spent. It's that identity performance spending scales with your income automatically. Every raise gets partly consumed by the next level of presentation required by your new status. The spending never produces the security it's implicitly promising. And the gap between who you appear to be financially and who you actually are financially becomes a source of low-level anxiety that is difficult to name but impossible to ignore. The question worth asking, genuinely, not rhetorically, is this. If nobody you knew would see the purchase, would you still make it? If the answer changes for a significant number of your expenses, you have found a meaningful source of financial recovery. Rule 12. Learning about personal finance in your 20s is worth more per hour than almost any other education you will pursue. This is not an exaggeration. It is a straightforward return on time calculation. 1 hour spent understanding how tax-advantaged retirement accounts work could produce, through better decisions and earlier action, tens of thousands of dollars in outcomes over a lifetime. 1 hour understanding how compound interest actually functions could shift the timing of your first investment in ways worth hundreds of thousands. 1 hour understanding how consumer debt works could save you from decisions that cost you years of financial progress. Most college graduates have received years of formal education and 0 hours of practical financial education. They know how to write a research paper. They do not know the difference between a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA, or which one applies to their situation, or how much they can contribute, or that the tax benefits are substantial enough to make it one of the most important financial decisions available to a young person. The information is not hard to access. It is not particularly complex. The concepts that matter most for financial outcomes, compounding, savings rate, tax-advantaged accounts, index fund investing, debt management, can be understood by anyone in a reasonable period of directed reading or watching. The barrier is not complexity. The barrier is the sense that it's not urgent, that it can wait, that there's time. And we have already established what that feeling costs. Rule 13. Your health decisions in your 20s are financial decisions, and the cost of ignoring this runs well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody connects these two things in personal finance content. They should. The chronic health conditions that drive the majority of healthcare costs in middle age, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, preventable cancers, chronic back pain, severe anxiety, and depression, are significantly influenced by habits established in your 20s. Sleep patterns, exercise habits, diet quality, alcohol consumption, stress management, these are not wellness topics disconnected from your financial life. They are the upstream inputs to your healthcare costs, your insurance premiums, your productivity, your cognitive function, and your ability to earn for the next 4 decades. The financial math is uncomfortable but worth examining. The average American with a serious chronic health condition spends approximately $6,000 more per year on healthcare costs than someone without one. Over 20 years, at a modest inflation assumption, that's more than $150,000 in additional healthcare spending. That's before accounting for lost work days, reduced earning capacity, and the compounding cost of investments not made because healthcare costs consumed the capital. I'm not done yet. The mental health dimension of this is equally financial. Anxiety and depression, both of which affect a significant proportion of people in their 20s and often go unaddressed, reduce financial decision-making quality in measurable ways. They increase impulsive spending, reduce capacity for long-term planning, and make the emotional regulation required for consistent investing more difficult. Treating mental health in your 20s is not separate from your financial plan. It is part of it. Rule 14. The people you choose to build a life with before 30 will have more financial impact on your outcomes than any strategy, investment, or income growth you achieve. This is the rule that feels most personal and is most consistently omitted from financial content. It matters enormously. If you build a partnership with someone who has fundamentally different values around money, someone who spends where you save, who takes on debt you avoid, who prioritizes present consumption where you prioritize future security, the financial consequences of that misalignment will outpace the impact of every smart financial decision you make individually. Divorce is one of the most financially destructive events available to a person. Financial conflict is one of the leading causes of relationship dissolution. And financial misalignment that is present before marriage almost never resolves itself through the marriage. This is not a call to be calculating about relationships. It's a call to be honest in them. Talking about money before sharing a financial life with someone, honestly, specifically, without performance, is not unromantic. It is one of the most genuinely loving things you can do for both people involved. Knowing how your partner thinks about debt, savings, risk, and lifestyle before those things become joint decisions is not a box to check. It is a fundamental prerequisite for a shared financial life that works. The positive version of this rule is equally powerful. Building a partnership with someone who is financially aligned, not necessarily identical, but genuinely compatible in values and direction, multiplies your wealth building capacity in ways that are nearly impossible to replicate individually. Two people with shared financial goals, complementary earning potential, and a unified strategy can reach financial independence at a pace that no individual can match alone. Rule 15, the single most powerful financial move available to a person under 30 costs nothing, takes about 30 minutes, and almost nobody does it. Writing down an honest financial inventory. Not a budget. Not a plan yet. Just an honest, complete, written picture of where you actually stand. What you earn, after taxes. What you owe, to whom, at what interest rate? What you own, including the actual current value of any investment accounts. What you spend monthly, by category, based on actual bank statements, not estimates. And what the gap is between what you're building and what you need to feel genuinely secure. Most people in their 20s have never done this. They have a vague sense of their financial position, optimistic in some areas, avoidant in others, but they have never sat down with the actual numbers and looked at them honestly and completely. The avoidance is not laziness. It's self-protection. Looking clearly at a gap is uncomfortable. The instinct is to maintain the comfortable ambiguity of not fully knowing. But the financial inventory is the foundation of everything else. You cannot build a plan without knowing where you're starting. You cannot make progress without measuring it. And the people who complete an honest inventory consistently report that the actual numbers, even when uncomfortable, are less frightening than the formless anxiety of not looking. The clarity itself is worth something. It converts a shapeless dread into a specific problem. And specific problems are solvable in ways that formless anxiety simply isn't. Transition to closing. I want to go back to Daniel and Caleb. Because I want to be honest about something. When Daniel turned 30 and the weight of that decade settled on him, when the $4,200 savings account confronted him and the $19,000 debt confronted him and the math of what he'd missed confronted him, he did not spiral. He did not give up. He did what most people do when reality finally arrives with clarity. He started. He started late. He started with less runway than Caleb had. The gap between them, built over 8 years, will take years to close and may never fully close. That is a real and permanent consequence of the decade he spent financially asleep. It cannot be undone. But it can be worked with. And Daniel, at 30, making the decisions he should have made at 22, is still building something. It is slower. It is harder. The habit of saving required more effort than it would have required at 22, before the lifestyle had fully calcified. But it is happening. Caleb, at 28, has not achieved financial independence. He is not wealthy by any dramatic measure. But he has something that most people his age do not have. He has a foundation. A structure that works without requiring his constant attention. A trajectory that, if he simply continues what he's already doing, leads somewhere genuinely good. He is not anxious about money in the pervasive, background noise way that so many people his age are anxious about money. And that absence of anxiety, that quiet confidence that the direction is right even if the destination is still far off, is worth more than it sounds. The difference between them is not intelligence. It is not income. It is not luck or circumstance or family assistance. It is the timing and consistency of a small number of ordinary decisions, made during a window that is uniquely available to people in their 20s and uniquely powerful in ways that are nearly impossible to replicate later. That window is open right now for some of you watching this. It is open for a limited time. Not because of some arbitrary deadline, but because of how compounding works, how habits form, how financial structures calcify, and how the range of available choices narrows with every year that the important decisions are deferred. Here is the line I want to leave you with. You cannot go back and start earlier. But you can start today, and 10 years from now, today will be the day you're grateful you did. That's the whole thing. That's all it is. Start today. Oyu Tiao, soft music, no rush. End card. If this video made one thing feel urgent that didn't feel urgent before, share it with someone in their 20s who needs to hear it. The next video in this series covers the exact financial setup you should have in place by 25, the specific accounts, the specific automations, and the specific numbers that mean you're on track and not behind.